Mike, I was going to call on people.
Give your name and school.
My name is Robert Krause with FAU, Florida Atlantic University. I really appreciate what you spoke about, the denigration of cultural relativism, that just because something's part of somebody's culture does not necessarily mean that that's good practice.
I think the mic's cutting out.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, there you go.
So yeah, I appreciate your look on cultural relativism, that it's not something that needs to be held up high. One thing though that I worry in a lot of this is that, as any literal will point out, Christianity back in the day, the Crusades, everything else, was used in much the same way. Now obviously Christianity has moved on from that as a culture we advanced. But if you look at it there, it's still within the Bible. You know, a lot of those negative aspects are still there. We choose not to necessarily look at those parts. What I want to see is perhaps a day where Islam is able to look past those negative parts. Is that an economic change? Is it a cultural change? How do you think they can move on?
Well, in the first place, the Crusades have some similarities. The Crusaders did some things that cannot be excused. That said, the Crusades were a very different kind of thing from the jihad. The jihad that the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda and the others are fighting today, and the jihads historically that conquered what had before that was half of the Christian world, which is now considered the heart of the Islamic world, the Middle East and North Africa, Persia and so on. Those jihads are based on, as I sketched out, the exhortation in the Koran to Muslims and the aggregate to wage war against Christians and Jews and to subjugate them under the rule of Islamic law. There is actually nothing in the Bible like that. There are violent passages in the Bible, in the Old Testament. There isn't really any in the New. But in the Old Testament, there are passages that depict violence, depict prophets clearing out their cities on the orders of God and so on. What you do not find, however, is any open-ended and universal exhortation to believers to wage war against unbelievers. Jewish and Christian scholars from the beginning have seen those passages as not referring to anybody else, and this is why even during the Crusades, you did not find Christians fighting the Muslims in the Middle East and pointing to the Bible and saying, we're doing this because we're imitating Joshua, or it says in Deuteronomy to go and clear out the city or something. They were never considered to be applicable to anybody except those to whom they were given. And they deeply embarrass both traditions, so that both traditions have ways that spiritualize those passages and take away their literal force. And you do not find today any Jewish or Christian groups anywhere in the world pointing to biblical passages and justifying violence on that basis. And I think that's because those passages really quite obviously are misused in that way. In the Quran, it's very different. The major sects of Islam and the schools of Islamic law all teach the necessity of the Muslims to wage war against unbelievers and subjugate them. There are plenty of Muslims who have no interest in doing that, and that's great. I'm very glad that they exist. But the fact is that these things are teachings of Islam. So in the first place, it's not quite analogous. In the second place, you're absolutely right. There does need to be a massive reevaluation of the texts and teachings of Islam so that these things are rejected, and the principle put in place that Muslims ought to live as equals with non-Muslims in societies not ruled by Islamic law on an indefinite basis, which is not something taught by any sect of Islam today. Now, how likely is that happening? I think, unfortunately, it's very unlikely. One reason is that in Islam, there is a very great tendency to reject bid'ah, innovation. It's wrong to innovate. This is because Muhammad said, my community will not agree on an error. And if the various scholars of Islamic law who laid out the principles of Islamic law 1,000 years ago, if they agreed on something, it's considered settled for all time. And the gate of ijtihad, which is independent legal reasoning on the Quranic texts and the teachings of Muhammad, it's considered to be, that period is gone. It's not allowed anymore. Now, that said, when we did have the British Empire and a little more cultural confidence in the West, there weren't so many jihads, and we didn't see all this terrorism around the world. This is because Islamic law also says you don't fight jihad if the enemy has more than twice your strength and you have no chance of winning. And I think if we recovered the cultural strength and the societal strength, the sense of pride in our own principles and willingness to defend them, that would be key to turning this around and containing it at the very least.